Hello and welcome back to the Villa Filler podcast. I'm here as always with my good friend Dan Wiseman. Dan, how you doing, mate?
I'm good today, mate. Excited for this one. We don't usually get too many guests on the podcast, but we've got a real Villa aficionado, someone that I always see not many opposition fans give a lot of love to Jack Grealish on the timeline, and I'm always happy to speak to one when they do. So yeah, excited today.
Absolutely. And of course, we are joined by Dan from Hopkin, looking to curl one. The probably, and I'm not just saying this because you're on the podcast, Dan, but genuinely one of my favorite Twitter accounts. I think you've got such a like an objective view of football. You see everything in a really good way. And if you don't follow him, which I'm sure you guys who are listening to this all do, because as Dan's alluded to, there's been plenty of brilliant tweets from Dan about Jack Grealish, Aston Villa, whatnot. But Dan, thanks for coming on, mate. How are you doing, first of all?
I'm not too bad, mate. Thanks. Got a little bit of a cold, but it's not COVID as far as I'm aware. So no.
Good. Well, as for those who are listening or watching who don't perhaps know Dan, I find your story fascinating from the bits that I've seen on Twitter and stuff, and from listening to your podcast. You've been around for a long time in terms of having an account on Twitter, and you've recently been able to kind of turn this into a full-time job, which is ultimately, I think, the dream for most people who are kind of doing this kind of stuff, Dan. So how did you get started in it, first of all, before we go into the game and stuff, for those who don't know and maybe don't know who you are?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm 31, turned 32 in January, just coming, and I had without wanting to sound too corny, from about the age of 6 or 7, I always wanted to be sort of a sports writer. It was something I wanted to do from when I was a very little boy. Used to write match reports sitting on my mum and dad's floor just as a little kid, because I used to just have this whole romance about the industry and everything. Pretty much geared my entire school life towards going and doing it journalistically at uni, and it ended up doing a sport journalism course down in Eastbourne. Managed to get through that. I only got a 2-2 because I got a bit too into drink and everything else down at uni. But yeah, and then at the end, to be honest, I was going to go and try and get into different media jobs and everything else. But I got a bit disillusioned with the industry before I even tried to get in it, purely because it felt to me like there was a fair bit of nepotism going on in terms of the opportunities that people got within newspapers and other things. And I didn't much fancy going and working for, say, the non-league paper and reporting on, I don't know, Carshot and Athletic every week when I wanted to be going to Palace. So I sort of turned my love of writing and my love of going to Palace and being around that into the same pursuit, and started the Twitter account, I believe, in 2011, maybe even earlier than that. And then it's just gradually grown year on year. And obviously now it's reached a point with the podcast and Patreon and everything else where I can turn it into a full-time job.
I mean, it's amazing, and I guess the kind of underlying thing there is just to persevere, because there's probably so many times where you could have easily just given it up, gone and carried on with your regular job. But absolute credit to you, mate, for going on and doing this. For those of you who don't know as well, was recently involved in quite the scandal involving Brentford's Ivan Toney. For those who aren't aware of that, looking back on it now, it's kind of funny, but it's a serious issue with, I think, obviously your career and what you're going into in terms of copyright, who's right in terms of distributing content, because you see it all the time. You see all kinds of football Twitter pages sharing videos and stuff. And I say to Dan, Dan and I both have access on the Heart of the Holte Twitter account. I make sure we're very careful with what we're sharing, especially after your fiasco, Dan. But you shared a goal from Ivan Toney, didn't you? And you ended up losing your account.
Yeah, it was a bit weird because obviously, I mean, the basic reason why I was given as to losing the account and being suspended was this copyright infringement. But I was under the impression prior to that DMCA notice going in that if I wasn't the person that had uploaded the footage that was in copyright infringement, because the goal itself had been filmed off someone's laptop or someone's TV, and it was the EFL's footage, but because I wasn't the person who uploaded the footage, I was always under the impression that I wouldn't be responsible. But on the DMCA notice that I received, eventually saw my account shut down for a period of time. It basically just listed my account as one of those that had put forward this tweet with the footage in. And it's almost like a 10 strikes and you're out thing over a space of, say, 10 years. So I was completely unaware, but because of this totting up process that goes on, it was like an algorithm that just decided, right, that's it, you're done. And obviously, like you said, given the fact this is now my income and my living, I suddenly didn't have any way of getting the podcasts and generating listeners. So it was a bit of a hairy moment for me. I set up the separate account, which I managed to get 20,000 followers back on in a matter of weeks. And then someone got in touch with me from Twitter last week and basically said he was going to try and help me get my account back. And within 2 hours, it was back. So it shows you that, you know, from a personal point of view, it's just someone that's able to push a button and unsuspend it. But without the human touch there, and with computers involved, it was just, right, you're done. And that was it.
You've got to walk such a fine line with this kind of stuff, haven't you? Because, like, you know, especially in terms of if you're looking at other fan media channels, mate, you know, I don't need to name names, but you see you see so much over the top reaction and stuff like that, and things you would genuinely expect for them maybe to lose monetization features or whatnot. But like, you, as you said, you shared a clip that someone else had shared, which is within the rights on Twitter. You're more than fine to do that, and you've had the rug pulled underneath you. I gotta say, mate, absolute credit to you for managing to garner in them followers back, because that is, I mean, I don't know what I'd have done if we'd have lost the heart of the Holte account. It's not even my account, it's not our account, but if we'd have lost the account, I don't know what we'd have done.
I mean, sorry to just jump in there. One of the strange elements to it that almost, well, it did save it without wanting to put too fine a point on it, is obviously with the Patreon account, I had 1,000 odd people that are signed up to that. And I was able to get a message out via the Patreon account to say what had happened and give people an update so they weren't left completely hanging. And someone within an hour of the account going down made up an account that was supposedly me that wasn't. And then they were trying to pretend to be me, and there were people that were my patrons saying, this isn't Dan, and it was all just a bit mad, to be honest with you. But without the Patreon account, I'm not really sure what I'd have done, or I definitely wouldn't have been able to get the 20,000 back as I did. So it's a blessing, really.
No, that is really amazing, honestly. If you guys who are listening to this podcast aren't a fan, aren't following, please do give Hopkin Looking to Co on a follow on Twitter. And if you're into not only just Palace podcasts, but in terms of general football podcasts as well, there's such a variety of content over on Dan's Patreon. So we'll really do encourage you to check that out. Honestly, can't speak highly enough of the content that Dan does. He's worked really hard. But less about you, Dan, and more about our Boxing Day, because it's a big game. It's on the BBC. First of all, Wiseman, I'll come to you. Palace, a bit of a bogey team for Villa, to be honest. I know we've got a few decent results here and there against them. Before we throw it back to Dan, how are you feeling coming into this game? Because I know we've spoken a bit off air about it, but for the guys who are listening to this podcast, what are your thoughts? Obviously, we're at home on the BBC, live and direct. What are you thinking, man?
Well, first of all, that's so great to see, isn't it? I mean, this is really quite almost an honour, really, isn't it? Boxing Day fixture live on the BBC, for it to be a Villa home game is quite something. I mean, I can't imagine there's too many times that's happened at all, to be honest with you. So first of all, I'm really excited for that aspect of it. But looking at the football, I should really be a lot more confident than I am, really, considering the results that we've got, especially in our last game. But we've struggled. I mean, we've said it on many times of this podcast. It's well versed amongst Villa fans that we do struggle at home this season. We're not the same side that we are away, and so there is that element whereby that is sort of playing in the back of your mind a little bit, isn't it? That despite how good we've been in recent weeks, that we are struggling. I'm really buoyed by the fact that Ross is back in contention. That's a massive boost for us, because I think he gives us a dimension that since he's been out, we've really struggled to replace. Apparently, Ezri Konsa is going to be back from injury as well, which is good. Although Courtney House has played really well in the 2 games he's played, so there's a bit of a selection dilemma there. But though, I mean, Palace are, a side that I've got a huge amount of respect for, and I think I've always drawn similarities between Zaha and Grealish, and that one man being a representative and sole figure for everything good that the club does. And so they're a team that I have a lot of time for. And one player that I'm really excited to speak to Dan about, especially with this being a Villa podcast after all, is Christian Benteke, who Dan, he's been, he's only scored 9 goals since the start of the 2017-18 season, having scored 49 in 3 seasons for Villa. He looked almost a shadow of the player that we saw Dan at Villa Park through his years at the club. But it's great to see that this season for you guys, he's starting to find his form a little back. He's back from suspension for this game. I'm excited to see Big Chris back at Villa Park.
Yeah, I mean, he is a player that it's strange, really, because in the first year he was at Palace, he obviously was under, I believe Alan Pardew was the manager that brought him in. And we played to his strengths. You know, we were putting balls in the air, straight into the penalty area. He scored one particular goal away at Everton, which was about 15 or 17 yards out. And it just, you know, perfectly directed past the keeper. It was a fantastic individual header, that. And he scored 17 that season, and it felt like he was the perfect focal point for our attack. For whatever reason, since Roy Hodgson's come in, we just haven't really ever played to his strengths. We've tried to play a bit more, not necessarily of a patient build-up, but balls into feet rather than to his head. And he just wasn't ever really built for that to be the primary route to goal, I don't think. And as a consequence of him not having balls in the air, he seemed to lose his confidence. And then he got a couple of injuries and a couple of little niggles here and there. And it just went down and down. There was a particular situation with a penalty at Selhurst Park. Can't remember who it was against now, but it was coming up to Christmas or just after Christmas.
Oh, I remember
years
this.
ago.
I remember
and
this.
He grabbed the ball to take it. And it was one of those situations where everyone knew the pressure was on him. And if he was going to miss, it was going to have a severe impact on everyone's opinion of him and everything else. And you know the way Christian takes penalties, he rolls them rather than smashing them. And he rolled it towards the keeper. It got saved. It cost us points. And it just pretty much, as a microcosm, it represented everything that was going wrong for him at that time. But against West Brom a couple of weeks back, we put him back in the starting 11. And having Zaha and Eze around him, and the amount of ball that we had in the final third against West Brom really seemed to suit him. And he was just back to his old self. And then obviously he got the goal at West Ham before getting the ban. And he just looks to be full of confidence again. And it is great to see, because we've lacked that focal point at the head of the side for so long.
You do have quite the front three, don't you? Just looking on paper, you've got Jordan Ayew, who can play there, Christian Benteke, of course, Wilf Zaha. The addition of Erebici Eze in the summer is a genuinely inspiring one. I believe Dan and I spoke about him a fair few times in the summer in our Transfer Remember podcast as a player that we really wanted Villa to sign. How he's kind of had minutes here and there from what I'm seeing from the outside. He's scored a free kick, wasn't it, a few weeks back, which was phenomenal. How good is Erebici Eze at the moment, and how good can he be?
I'll be honest, I was extremely excited when we signed him, because I saw a lot of him at QPR last season, and obviously he looked a level above most of the Championship for the majority of last season. But you're never quite sure how players like Eze are going to adapt to the Premier League because of the pace of play and how, you know, good the defenders can be, particularly fullbacks. And from the QPR fans that I spoke to when we did sign him, a lot of them said, don't put him out wide, play him in the middle. Roy Hodgson doesn't really play with a number 10 out and out. He tends to play people as sort of inside forwards and cutting in and trying to support the front men. So at first I was a little bit concerned as to how he would mesh in the side, particularly when you consider how much of a focal point Zaha is, because everything we do goes through him in an attacking sense. And having the pair of them in the team at first, it seemed like there was going to be a bit of a logjam. But against West Brom and in general, I mean, admittedly, the Liverpool result just recently, it was everyone played badly, but I don't think you can necessarily lay much blame at Eberechi Eze's feet for that. But in general, the way that he plays and the way he can glide with a football is just incredible to watch, because he doesn't particularly strike you as a player with a huge amount of pace. But I think it's almost a deception, because he's so calm on the ball that you aren't really realising how fast he's moving. You know, he sort of glides along and you think, well, someone can't keep up with him, but it doesn't even look like he's breaking a stride. It's a bit weird. But yeah, he's a fantastic footballer. And I think, you know, £16 million what we paid for him. And you know, if he continues on his same trajectory, I can see us being, you know, offers of 30 or 40 million in the summer if he carries on the way he is.
Well, the thing is what I like most about Eze is, you know, he's a real feel-good story. You know, the way that, you know, he was born in Greenwich in not particularly a nice area, and he's really spoken about that, about how at points his upbringing was tough. He was signed by Arsenal. You know, his youth career, he really bounced around London. You know, had a time at Arsenal, Fulham, Reading, was eventually released by Millwall. And in 2016, he was working part-time at Tesco. He eventually gets signed by QPR, goes up through the ranks, you know, and eventually becomes more and more prominent in the Championship. He was then, I think he was in the last season's team of the season, gets this move to Palace, obviously, you know, born in London. That's a big move for him to stay there. And the way that, as you said, Dan, the way that he stepped up to the Premier League is something that, you know, can really be admired, because Championship players, sometimes they do that, sometimes they, and often if they do, it sometimes take them quite a while. But Eze's really fit nicely into this Palace team. But I think, given the nature and how free-flowing players like Zaha and Eze are, I think it's quite remarkable how underrated the likes of James MacArthur have been in anchoring that midfield, because I don't think Eze and Zaha have the license to go and play the way they do unless you have those anchors in midfield. And James MacArthur, I don't think really gets enough credit for the role he plays in that team.
No, I think, well, Jimmy is one of those players that, from a Palace fan perspective, if you speak to any of our supporters over the last 3 or 4 years, we adore him because he's the definition. I remember when we signed him from Wigan, they were saying that you get 18-yard box to 18-yard box players, but Jimmy is a goal line to goal line player. You know, he will literally run until he can't run anymore. And he's been that way his entire career. He has little dips where you sort of, the energy is a bit misplaced, but most of the time, and I'm talking like 9 games out of 10, he's a solid 7 or 8 out of 10. And you can just tell that he's reliable. He doesn't necessarily, you know, pick defences apart with 30-yard passes or do anything that's spectacular. But like you said, without the likes of Jimmy in the midfield, then it doesn't really allow the likes of Zaha and Eze to do what they can do. So he's definitely a massive player for us and someone that does go under the radar a fair bit.
Obviously, as you alluded to just earlier, Dan, the 7-0 loss to Liverpool, watching the game, I mean, the highlights by no means do Palace justice at all, because it's just every single shot Liverpool takes has gone in. There's, of course, there's levels to this. That Palace had like 4 or 5 opportunities in the first half where you can't help but feel like if it was Liverpool, they'd have gone in just because of the look on the day. Can we read? I don't think we can read too much into this game coming into this, can we, Dan?
I don't think so, no. It's obviously tricky. Whenever you've lost 7-0, I mean, my mentions on Twitter were full of people, especially Liverpool fans, seem to absolutely hate me for some reason. I don't know why, but they do. But yeah, it was one of those days when you consider how good Vicente Guaita was against Tottenham and how many saves he made in that particular game, and then you come to face Liverpool. Often with Palace, if we can stay in a game and it's 0-0, I think it's 28 games now in which, when we've scored first in the Premier League, we haven't lost. And to go 1-0 down to a side like Liverpool after 3 minutes, I think it was, it really did knock the stuffing out of us. But to be fair, in the sort of 20 minutes that followed, like you say, we had a number of good chances. There was one in particular where Jordan Ayew ran in down the right-hand side and he had the opportunity to either shoot or square it to Zaha, and he's ended up pulling it back, but behind Wilf, and he got cleared. And then I think from there, really, it was just a case of everyone's momentum dropped a little bit. They scored 2 more before half-time, and it was just, you know, you end up with a situation where it's got away from you before you even know where you are. And obviously, whenever you concede 7, it's not great. But like you said, I don't think it's necessarily symptomatic of our football this season. It was just one of those days, really. And obviously, with Liverpool being the way they are, they have the quality with the likes of Salah, etc., to score goals like they did on any given day because they've got such quality in the final third.
I think what I'm looking forward to most about this game is that, you know, whilst you can really read it in one or two ways, because at home, we've conceded a fair few goals this season. You know, we conceded 3 at home to Leeds, we conceded 4 at home to Southampton, then you've got another 2 we conceded against Brighton and that sort of thing. And we've really, you know, we have more clean sheets than any other side in the division. But then on the other side, we've had these real lapses where we really do struggle to defend at times. And I feel that's sort of similar with you guys as well, because you guys, unless I'm mistaken, I don't think you guys have kept a clean sheet since the opening day of the season. And so there is a real potential for some goals in this game. And I think there is that nature whereby, you know, because it's on Boxing Day, because it's live on the BBC, I imagine, you know, given the players on nature, the likes of Zaha, Grealish, there's a real chance for players to want to go and put on a show on quite a big stage. And I don't know, I think whilst it's perhaps not the headline fixture that many fans were hoping for on Boxing Day, I think we can see 2 teams who, in a lot of regards, are quite similarly matched, have got similar aspirations this season. I think it could be a really good game.
I agree, to be honest. In many ways, and obviously you can't ever say that a 7-0 defeat is a positive, but it will, I think, force the players into a bit more soul searching, because we'd come into that Liverpool game with 3 straight games without a defeat. You know, there was a genuine feel-good factor starting to go through the club. And then, of course, we lost Benteke to the suspension after West Ham. And to be fair, I think that's probably altered our entire game plan quite significantly for a team like Liverpool. So he's coming back for the Villa game. He's obviously previously employed by yourselves. He's going to want to put on a good performance again. And the entire team should be motivated to make sure that the same thing doesn't happen. When you consider that, Villa put 7 past Liverpool earlier in the season and Liverpool have just put 7 past us, there's obviously everyone from a neutral perspective, especially given the form you've been on lately, are going to be expecting a pretty comfortable Villa win. But we tend to do quite well bouncing back from these sort of shock results. So hopefully we can be relatively competitive.
Absolutely. Well, just on that, I think we mentioned that in the last podcast we did, Dan, when we briefly spoke about Palace. You go to Old Trafford and you beat them 3-1, and then the next game at home you lose to Everton 2-1. You've beaten Fulham comfortably at Craven Cottage, then you've lost the next game to Wolves, but you've bounced back there and beat Leeds United straight after that 4-1 in a brilliant game. I think a lot of Villa fans certainly enjoyed that one. But then you go and lose to Burnley, so there is this bounce back ability, to quote, it wasn't Neil Warnock, was it? Who said that? Ian Dowie, that's the one. There is this bounce back ability in this Crystal Palace side, which is of course for you going to fill you with great confidence. What do you see I'm interested to know from an outsider's point of view, because of course Dan Wiseman and I are extremely critical of Villa, and we're aware of our weaknesses. I'm just looking to see what you think, Dan. Where do you see Palace getting some joy from this Villa side?
To be honest, I mean, without wanting to come onto your podcast and sort of big Villa up too much, given the end you had to last season and how well you've started this, I think if you were going to look at it on paper from a completely neutral point of view, everyone would have Villa down as favourites to win, particularly given the fact you're at home. But in many ways, we do thrive when teams sort of allow us to play rather than sitting there deep. You look at the West Brom game where we've ended up scoring 5.
Yeah.
And when it all went to pot for them when they went down to 10 men. But the more space we get to exploit, particularly on the break, we can be very dangerous. So from your perspective, you're at home, like you've said, it's on Boxing Day, you're going to want to put on a good show. If you allow us that room to sort of break on you and not sit and be too stoic on the edge of your 18-yard box, with players like Zaha and Eze in the side, we have the outball that can get up the pitch, particularly if Benteke's back and confident again. So it's not so much Villa as a specific team, but more a general styles make football matches thing. As long as you don't sit there and, try and spoil the game in terms of sitting deep with 10 men behind the ball, then we should, have the opportunity to score once or twice. I mean, we've had to, as Dan Wiseman has already said, we've only kept 1 clean sheet all season, and that was on the first day. So we tend to have to score more than once if we want to win. It should be a pretty entertaining game, all in all, I would imagine.
I think it's got all the classic. It's got all the hallmarks to become a classic game between the two sides. Obviously, the most recent fixture as well, last time out at Villa Park, there's certainly going to be this kind of air of unfinished business. There was the controversy with the first the Villa goal, wasn't there, with the potentially the handball shout, which I think is completely fair. We got away with murder on that one, and it proved to be obviously a very important point in Villa staying up last season. Before we end this though, Dan, I do this to Dan Wiseman every week. I put him on the spot. He's come to expect it. He thought he could get away with it this week because we had a guest on, but I'm going to ask both of you for a score prediction.
Do you want me to go first? Yeah,
yeah, go on. We'll have yours first.
I didn't know Dan Wiseman was going to jump in.
He needs as long as possible.
I will go with 2-2 as that, because I like that. You said, I think it's one of those games. Boxing Day tends to be a bit unpredictable anyway. And as much as you are in good form and everyone will be expecting a victory if they are looking at it from a completely neutral perspective, I think, we've got a point to prove after that 7-0. And I'm sure our players won't be happy to go and lose 2 on the spin. So, and as I say, we don't really tend to keep clean sheets. So I can see us scoring a couple. I can see you scoring a couple. And I don't want to predict us to lose on a rival team's podcast. So I'll go 2-2.
Dan Wiseman.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to sound like a right bottle job here, having let Dan go first. But yeah, I'm going to say I was thinking 2-2. I like that a lot. We haven't, it sounds like I'm being right quick about this, but no, I think 2-2 is fair. I think we had, there was a real importance when we last played Palace, because of the situation that we were in. Trezeguet got those 2 goals. We won that game, but you were talking about controversial refereeing decisions in the Villa game, but you take it way back to the game at Selhurst Park, which is like infamous for to us with Grealish. So these two teams have a lot to prove against each other. we're a bit inconsistent at home. Palace, I think Dan making that point that they've got to come out and prove a point, which they have done many times this season. You know, it was only a few, like a week ago, just over, they went and got results against like the likes of Spurs. So they've shown that they can do it this season. I think 2-2, it's two evenly matched sides. I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah, I'm going to go 2-2 as well.
I mean, we can put that disallowed goal at Selhurst Park down to, I mean, Henry Lansbury would be a starting in the midfield surely still if that goal had have gone in. I mean, it's got. I remember I was so upset when that happened. That was not a good day. But of course, I can't imagine Dan's complaining too much about that one.
I'll be honest. Let me just jump in for 30 seconds there, because I came out of the ground at Selhurst that day, and obviously, you know, I'm not some Villa page, but there's a fair few Villa fans follow me on social media. And I hadn't seen it on any clips or anything. I'm just walking down the Holmesdale Road to get back in my car. And people are bombarding my mentions going, have you seen that? It's a disgrace. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute. Give me 5 minutes to breathe. But yeah, I have to admit, I'd have been fuming if I was your side of it. So yeah, I can definitely understand the frustration.
I mean, that's just the problem with you know, the game in its current state. It's a bit of a joke, to be honest. You see, I mean, Ollie Watkins 2 goals now disallowed for his armpit being offside, and you can clearly see on the footage that they're not even drawing the line straight, which is just an absolute disgrace. But we'll save that for another podcast.
Yeah, we can't get into this.
You know, we can't force you to talk about this. We know you.
Handball if I had to. Do you know what I mean? It was off the back.
We won't different podcast.
Oh my God. But yeah, no, Dan, we just want to say a massive thank you for agreeing to come on the podcast.
Oh, well.
If you guys, again, for whatever reason, are living under a rock and haven't followed Hopkin Lucky to Go on, please do follow them on Twitter, and also consider checking out their Patreon with the podcasts. You've got a £5 and £3 tier, haven't you? Daily football podcasts.
The general football, and not me rambling about Palace every morning. It's $3, so I think it's pretty reasonably priced.
Nice touch.
100%. It's. And again, just to echo the sentiments that we shared earlier on, you know, it's really good to see. It's a good story to come out of what can often be misconstrued as a fairly toxic community or just career in general, I guess. You know, so massive shout out to you for being able to make this your full-time job, and I wish you luck ahead of the game, but obviously not too much, Dan. Thank you very much for coming on, mate.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Cheers, mate. Thank you. So there we have it. Again, we'd just like to say a massive thank you to Dan from Hopkin Looking to Co on for coming on the Villa Filler podcast. It means the most, man. And I think most people, Dan, who are on, I hate to say football Twitter, but you know what I mean by that. Follow this guy. And generally, again, not just saying this because he's on the podcast, but one of my favourite Twitter accounts for the longest time. So it was really good to chat with him there and just have a bit of a chat off air as well. Really nice guy.
Yeah, lovely guy, man, and really appreciate it. You know, it's nice when these pages come together, help each other out. You know, as you say, he's not like this biased Crystal Palace fan. That's all he wants to talk about. He's got a really nice view of a lot of things that go on in the game, and really good to speak to him. And hopefully we get to hop on his podcast too from time to time. That'd be cool. But no, yeah, it's we don't often do guests, mate. So it says a lot about this guy that we're happy to have him on.
Absolutely. And as we're about to run out of minutes on Zoom, if you guys did enjoy this podcast, please leave a like, comment your thoughts below. Let us know what you think the score of this game is going to be. And we'd also like to give a massive thank you to everybody who has watched the West Brom podcast reaction and also the Transfer Rumour Mill podcast on Renato Sanchez and Jesse Lingard. Again, just to quickly address something, we did preface in the video and the podcast that we aren't linked with Renato Sanchez. And we did actually film this a few days in advance. It went out. Since then, the rumours of Liverpool have come up. So to everyone in the comments, thank you for letting us know. We do know that was us from the past. But yeah, as well, thank you to all the new subscribers. We've gained about nearly 100 subscribers since posting that podcast. So thank you very much for all the support, guys. We hope you stick around. And as I say, like the video if you enjoyed. Comment your thoughts below on the score prediction and subscribe for more. Up the Villa.